L'économie est avant tout une science sociale qui étudie les relations entre les êtres humains et la société. Pour reprendre le titre du livre de Jean Tirole, prix Nobel d'économie et président d'honneur de TSE, l'économie, c'est au service du bien commun, c'est-à-dire qu'elle est là pour nous aider à imaginer un monde meilleur. Dans cette vidéo, nous allons vous montrer comment les chercheurs de TSE tentent de rendre notre monde meilleur autour de 3 sujets qui sont des sujets qui nous concernent tous: la santé, la finance, l'intelligence artificielle, et comprendre comment, pour chacun de ces domaines, la connaissance économique peut nous aider à améliorer l'efficacité des dispositifs et le bien-être de chacun. La première interview va nous parler d'économie de la santé avec Angélique Aquatella, jeune chercheuse américaine qui a obtenu son doctorat à Harvard et qui nous a rejoint il y a peu, et Pierre Dubois, directeur du centre de recherche en santé, qui nous parle de l'économie de la santé, le prix du médicament et le financement de l'innovation.
So my research aims to address many fundamental issues about pharmaceutical research, for example, which is very important for healthcare. So since a few decades there is a lot of progress in medicine with gene and cell therapies, and all these are extremely promising for healthcare, for cancer, for many diseases. We have immunotherapies, we have a lot of novel technologies. Unfortunately, those technologies are very expensive and they are challenging the healthcare sector, they are challenging the healthcare finance. So we need to organize the way innovation is financed. There is always a trade-off between static and dynamic efficiency. We want to maximize the access of drugs, minimize the cost. But on the other hand, we know that for dynamic efficiency, for innovation in the future, we need to protect innovation. We need to reward the innovators. There are several examples of the impact of our research. Some of our research results have been used by policymakers to have better informed decisions in the US or in Europe. More recently, we have been working on policies that could try to help finance investment and R&D in the area of antibiotics. We know that we need more novel antibiotics. There are a lot of risks in the future due to antibiotic resistance. There is a lack of investment. So this is a typical market failure. One of our research shows that one solution to correct for this market failure is to decorrelate the revenue from the sales. One instrument that could do that is the use of transferable exclusivity extensions. And we have been working on this, and recently the European Commission, after we present our work to the European Parliament and different institutions, the European Commission has proposed in the new pharma legislation to use this type of mechanism.
Our comparative advantage as academic economists is really in quantifying the trade-offs. One of the big reasons that we've had a lot of innovation over the past 50 years is because insurance has provided a market that is able to pay for very expensive treatments and able to give the profits that are necessary to stimulate private markets in this type of innovation. Public financing of health insurance interacts in a very intricate way with healthcare markets. And we face important decisions into how to design public insurance. Because ultimately, these policy decisions end up having consequences both on patients' access to healthcare and on providers delivering healthcare. And beyond that, on a dynamic front, they also end up having consequences on the types of treatments that we have available. Now, public budgets are limited. We have to make tough decisions between financing pensions or cutting back on the generosity of health insurance system. And the consequences of cutting back or improving the generosity of healthcare system end up having fundamental consequences on inequality, particularly on health dimension. In the US, there are stark disparities across the rich and the poor. The richest individual in the US lives 15 years longer than the poorest individual. Yet, if we look back at the average individual today and compare them to the average individual 50 years ago, we've made tons of progress on life expectancy. So public financing of health insurance need not be something that generates a budget deficit, but actually can have a fiscal sustainability portion. So what my research tries to do is it tries to quantify the trade-offs for policymakers to then think about how do we make these tough choices when we have to deal with limited government budgets, taking into account both the fiscal sustainability of public investments as well as the social preferences for redistributive potential of public transfers.
Dans cette deuxième interview, nous allons découvrir le monde fascinant, mais parfois inquiétant, de l'intelligence artificielle avec deux experts de TSE. César Hidalgo, en provenance du MIT, a rejoint TSE en 2019, et Jean-François Bonnefond, qui est le directeur de l'IAST, l'Institute for Advanced Study in Toulouse, qui est la plateforme de recherche interdisciplinaire de TSE.
At the Center for Collective Learning, we actually use AI for a number of things. On the one hand, we can use AI to understand international development, but we can also use it to gather new forms of data and even to build tools that we can use to distribute our research. But one of the things that is hard is that we have to make sure that we're doing these things the right way. There are a lot of things that could go wrong, so that's something that you work on.
Yeah, I mean, doing it right is what my research is about. That means that on the one hand, we need the machines, the AI, to behave in a good way, an ethical way, but we also need to understand what humans are going to do when they have access to the AI. For example, one thing we showed recently is that delegating to AI agent can blur the frontier between right and wrong in people's mind. For example, sometimes there are things they would not do themselves, like fudging numbers in a report to make it look good, but they find it easier to let the AI agent do it for them. So that means that this kind of behavior creates systemic risks, and to detect those risks, you cannot just look at market data. You have to run lab experiments, to use behavioral methods, to understand psychology, and well, that's just one kind of methods that you need to bring if you need to understand the total impact of AI.
So one of the things that we have been doing is using AI to understand how people perceive cities. We all know that some cities have some great neighborhoods and some neighborhoods that are not so great, but those are qualitative judgments that are hard to transform into quantitative maps. Now, using AI, we have been able to create very detailed maps of people's perception of city across a variety of dimensions, which places look historical, safe, lively, wealthy, and so forth. And that can help us identify areas of intervention, can help us suggest improvements, and think about new forms of civic participation, where the AI is not only involved on changing the digital space, but might contribute to how we change our physical space too.
Yes, opportunities. I like that because so much of my research is about detecting the risks and threats of AI that it feels really good sometimes when you can identify a positive impact. For example, at the moment there is so much discussion about the use of large language models, LLMs, to manipulate and misinform people. But what we could show is that they can also be used to improve information. For example, to subtly reframe climate news so that skeptics get interested into climate science. And it's so important because that means we can use these models to fight polarization, to fight misinformation, and to, well, actually improve democracy. And I think that's something you're interested in.
Absolutely. So we can think of AI as something that could hurt our democracy. We can use it to generate misinformation, but also we can try to be a little bit more hopeful and use it in creative ways. For instance, we can think of how we would design a deliberation or participation system that incorporates AI and incorporates digital tools as an asset, not as a liability. And that's actually something that we have a big project on. We have an ERC project together with many PIs here in Europe that is exploring new designs of participation and deliberation that use AI as an essential component, what we call augmented democracy.
Yeah, I totally agree that our work is no longer just about understanding the present, but that it's also about trying to anticipate the future. And I've got this feeling, I don't know if you have it, that my work is getting closer to science fiction, closer to science than fiction, but still using the methods of science to try to anticipate this world that is not there yet.
And that's, I think, one of the beautiful things about being at a place like TSE. We're not just trying to understand the present, we're trying to build the future. And that's great for students because students are going to go into a world that is going to be different from the one that we have today. So it's better that they experience the future today, and that's one of the things that they're going to do if they are at a place where the future is being built.
Dans cette troisième interview, nous parlons Fintech, les nouvelles technologies au service de la finance. Autrement dit, comment est-ce que ces Fintech peuvent améliorer l'accès à l'argent et améliorer les services financiers. Et pour en parler, deux chercheurs de TSE, Shuqing Jin, jeune chercheuse chinoise qui a fait son doctorat à Boston, qui nous a rejoint il y a peu, et Milo Bianchi, chercheur italien, spécialiste de la finance et qui est parmi nous depuis 2013.
When you ask people whether new technologies make them live better, they tend to respond yes. To a large extent also when it comes to financial decision. And we can see a reason why. First, financial technology allow to serve people at lower costs so to serve people who typically have not been served before. And second, they use new data, new ways to process information, and this can help build better service for people.
So in my research, I also find that new technologies not only reduce cost, they also provide competition for the existing old financial institutions in the market, and that will encourage the existing firms, the existing financial institutions to also lower their prices for the consumers and the investors.
Things, of course, are not so simple. There are risks that we have to be aware of. At the beginning, people tend to be very reluctant to trust new technologies and to trust algorithms. And now we are moving towards a phase in which maybe there is some over-reliance on algorithm. When people see some advice from a chatbot, they tend to rely totally on that. So what is the right trust to put on algorithm is a big question. Another is that the interaction with new technologies and with robots requires more and not less financial literacy and more and not less digital literacy, and not everybody is well equipped. And so there is the risk that these new technologies amplify existing inequalities.
So on my end, there are two ways things could go wrong here. On the one side is that the consumers may not completely take advantage of these new financial products. So in my research, I find that the consumers, for example, tend to stick to the old products that they've used for a really long time, or they might be confused about the different financial products features that prevents them from making the best choices. So even when there are these new financial innovations, the consumers or the investors don't necessarily take a full advantage of it. And on the other hand, the financial innovations are not necessarily always good products. They might be just trendy, but not necessarily good investments. And in addition to that, they may just flood the market with a lot of products and making the choices even more difficult for the consumers and the investors.
I think it's fair to say that regulation in many countries, especially those at the frontier of new technologies, is lagging behind. And this is probably based in part on a belief which is false, that regulation is an impediment for the development of these new technologies. In fact, if we look at history, there are a lot of examples from the Industrial Revolution in which it was precisely because the right regulations were in place to ensure that new technologies were safe, that people could use them and they could be developed throughout the population.
So government regulations often affect how easy it is to introduce a new financial product to the market. I think this is also where our research can really come in and help. So it is really important for us to understand how consumers and investors really behave in the market, as well as the nature of these new financial products, and these knowledge will all help us to improve the regulatory environment in this market.
Nous tenions à remercier les chercheurs de TSE, ceux qui sont sur la vidéo bien sûr, mais l'ensemble de la communauté TSE qui œuvre au quotidien pour améliorer la science, pour améliorer la connaissance et pour faire en sorte que nous vivions dans un monde meilleur et que nous ayons davantage d'éléments pour le comprendre. From Toulouse to the world.